criminal defense attorney who's working on a shocking case that is raising eyebrows across the country. That's next.
Many are predicting that the worst is yet to come, which is unfortunate, said one person here. Until now, they've enjoyed the reputation of being the nation's icebox.
Watched a burglar in his home this morning by webcam.
As a journalist of over 25 years, stories are what make my world turn.
Reporting live from the Dallas newsroom tonight, Jeff Crilley, Fox 4 News.
But in 2008, I took the jump from my familiar life and started a PR firm from my home.
We're talking about anyone with a camcorder like the one I'm using becomes a television network.
We started slowly growing the company, and we now have over 100 clients, and we've branched into the world of live digital broadcasting. I now own 8 different TV studios and have a huge team, and the stories that I now get to share are sometimes the most important of my life. Life has a funny way of coming around full circle. This is the Jeff Crilley Show. Never have civil rights cases been more newsworthy than they are now, and a man who knows a little something about that, Scott Palmer. You seem to be getting called in on all of the big cases these days. Scott and I have known each other for a decade now.
Several years, yeah.
Yeah, thank you for coming on the show.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, well, you and I got reconnected because you are working on a case that's still active, that is has gotten you national publicity. We're going to roll a little video because I want you to get right to it and describe what this case is all about. This is a clip from Channel 8 last week. Tell us about the case.
So we have Marco Puente, who's following his son on the way to his son's great-grandfather's house in Keller, a really nice upscale neighborhood, and he sees that his son is being pulled over, and he's like, what's going on? And he looks up, and his son is out of the car, bent over his own hood, handcuffed, and he's like, something's not right. We're on their way to his grandfather's house. Something's not right. So he takes out his phone, stops on the roadway briefly, and starts videoing, and the officer who's arresting his son is saying, move on, get out of the roadway, park your car, and walk back. And he does everything that the officer sort of orders him to do, which he didn't have to. He could have just left. But he was concerned about his son. He then proceeds to walk back towards down the street, and he's standing there, video recording the officer arresting his teenage, or no, he's a 22-year-old son, and he's concerned because he doesn't think this is right. He doesn't know that the body cams on the officers are actually rolling, or that he even has body cams. He wants his own independent video of the situation, because if this is wrong, it's a bad arrest, he's going to want to bring it to light. Next thing he knows, a cover officer shows up, and Officer Shimanek, who's the arresting officer, who's a sergeant in Keller PD, orders his colleague, Officer Tomer, to watch him. And he says, watch me doing what? Stand here? He says, check that. Arrest him. I mean, in a blink of an eye. And they both would then walk across the street. The first officer puts the son on the curb, and they both walk over to Marco, just standing there passively, and they lay hands on him, and they try to get his phone from him. He doesn't want to let go of his phone, of course. He's still recording, and they take him to the ground. He's wearing a pair of sunglasses. They rip off the sunglasses, causing a little kind of a rip in his nostril, and then the officer, Tomer, pepper sprays him twice in his eyes as they're on top of him, taking him to the ground, handcuffing him. And he really isn't resisting very, very difficult. I mean, he could have been, and he's a big guy, he could have used a lot more force against them, but he was actually just like, what the heck, guys? Not using any profanity, completely incredulous to why this is happening to him. He has not committed any crime, yet he's being treated like a third-rate criminal.
Yeah, and you're going to be on all the news stations again tonight. You've been in the New York Times. There's an article that we're going to pop up on the screen. Why do you think this has gotten so much attention?
I think it's a combination of there was literally no crime occurring, and then the officer just accelerates this so fast. I mean, they talk about police de-escalation. There was nothing to de-escalate.
Right.
There was literally no crime being committed by Marco. And I think this is resonating with people, because if an officer can go from 0 to 100 that quickly over nothing, imagine, and this man's on the Keller SWAT team, imagine what he's going to do or is capable of doing in a real high pressure situation. This is not even a this wasn't a high stress, high anxiety situation. It's just a dad standing across the street videoing an officer arresting his son, and it turns into so much more. I think people are angry, especially after the summer that we've had in this country with the civil rights demonstrations, all of the attention on police misconduct. And it sort of begs the question, I mean, Marco is Hispanic, his son is Hispanic. What's interesting in this case is the great-grandfather is a white man. He gets even closer to the officers as they're assaulting Marco, and he's got his own phone, and they're telling him to step back. He even gets closer and is defying them, openly defying these officers, saying, "No, this is wrong what you're doing," and he's actually talking to the officers as they're manhandling his great-grandson's father, and they don't do anything to him. So, what's going on in the minds of these officers? Is it racially profiling these two? I don't know. But it's certainly uncomfortable and disturbing.
And the story is still developing because there's an event tonight in Keller,
right?
And I guess there's a petition drive. Talk about those.
So the City Council in Keller is convening a executive session, which I believe is a closed-door session, to discuss this case. I don't know what's on the agenda specifically. I don't know whether or not the demotion, so the Internal Affairs Department of the Keller Police Department, they acted on this pretty quickly. They demoted Sergeant Shimanek to a patrol officer. And that has not sat well with a lot of people. There's a petition in the Star-Telegram this morning. There's an article about this petition that was started by a Keller resident, and there's over 18,500 signatures calling for the firing of Officer Shimanek and I believe Officer Tomer. It's an interesting development. It shows me that there's a large section of the community that is not going out of their way to sign a petition,
Sure.
that they don't believe that the action that the Keller Police Department took was enough in this situation.
So let's talk about rights. I mean, everybody has a phone that is now a video camera.
Right.
I would assume that in a public street, if you're just minding your own business, you have a right to film, right?
You have a right to film. Well, there's certain parameters, but generally speaking, you have a right to film the police for sure. If you're not interfering with the police, if you're not getting too close for them to be able to do what they need to do to effectuate an arrest, you can film from a safe distance. And that's what he was doing. He was across the street, literally stationary, feet planted, not moving, and not being rude or disrespectful to the officer. He's just standing there trying to figure out what's going on with his son, because it didn't make any sense to him that one moment he's following his son to the great-grandfather's house, and the next minute he turns a corner and his son's under arrest. It just didn't make sense.
And so if a cop tells you to turn off your phone, do you have to obey?
No. I mean, you have the right to video whatever it is. Now, if they're trying to arrest you and you're trying to video that arrest, which is what happened here with Marco, it gets a little bit dicier because, you're not allowed to resist arrest. There is a caveat to that in the penal code, that if an officer has no justification and goes hands-on and uses excessive force before you offer any resistance, you have the right to then offer resistance. Sort of what happened here, but Marco didn't really offer much resistance at all. And remarkably, he was pretty calm for what happened to him. I mean, he didn't use profanity. He didn't fight back. He's a big man. They got him into handcuffs pretty quickly. Of course, they subdued him with the pepper spray, which was completely unnecessary.
Sure.
There was no reason for them to touch him. There was no reason for them to cross the street. The whole thing is just mind-boggling.
I guess this has to be very rewarding for you to work on cases like this where you can make a difference. I mean, this is why you got into the business, isn't it?
This is every time we get a civil rights case like this, it's not just about the person and what they went through. There is principle involved in these cases. It's a dangerous, slippery slope, because when you get principled, you kind of lose focus of what's in front of you. But we brought this to light. We bring out every time there's a police brutality situation in this community. We hope that it changes the way other police behave. Nobody wants to have their names associated with bad conduct. And Officer Shimanek brought this on himself. And, this happened this story broke during Christmas. And, nobody wants to have that kind of negativity associated with their professional conduct. And he was unprofessional that day. He did something that police officers should never do, which is go out of their way to create a situation that didn't need to be created. I mean, you're supposed to protect and serve. he literally was doing the opposite that day.
And this is probably a wake-up call for police departments across the country. I mean, certainly even in rookie school, aren't you taught, what you can and can't do with regard to cell phones?
I think this video and this lawsuit will be a teaching moment for a lot of departments across the country. You have to keep your composure. You have to be the bigger man. And in this situation, he wasn't even being a bigger man than Marco, because Marco wasn't doing anything wrong. But they teach officers to de-escalate any tension. There was no de-escalation necessary here. It was all acceleration by the officer in a manner that was just completely inconsistent with his training. Why he flew off the handle so quickly, why he ordered his cover officer to arrest him, it just doesn't make any sense. There was nothing going on that needed this amount of attention and this amount of force. There's no force that was necessary, zero.
Scott, you've been doing this now for 20 years, but your civil rights practice is really growing, isn't it?
24 years, Jeff. Make sure that those extra 4. The civil rights practice is growing. I have an associate named James Roberts who is actually instrumental on this case. He knows every nook and cranny, every slice of that video. He's my right hand when it comes to my civil rights practice. We have a whole section in my office dedicated to civil rights. We're needing to hire more lawyers because we're too busy.
And I think everything that you said happened over the summer has given a lot of victims courage to come forward. I mean, they're not sitting on it anymore, and right?
Marco's a perfect example. I mean, he said in many interviews this morning as well, this isn't just about him. It's about, if you don't speak up and you don't let the public know this is what happened to me, it'll happen to other people. And that's why these lawsuits are important. They do tend to make a change in the behavior of other officers. I mean, I've talked to officers, retired officers, people that have worked on the streets, and they're just disgusted that he would do this because there was just no reason for it. And to bring shame on the Keller PD, to bring shame on himself and his colleagues over nothing, just kind of begs the question as to why.
If there's somebody watching this who thinks they may have a case, how long do they have to file or come see somebody like you?
Generally 2 years.
Okay.
The statute of limitations in Texas and the federal laws go by the state statute of limitations. For a 1983, Section 1983 police brutality, excessive force, constitutional violation, it's 2 years.
Okay. Well, Scott, thank you so much for being on the show. We're going to put up your website so people can get in touch. It's scottpalmerlaw.com. And thank you for all that you do to bring justice to the world.
Thank you for having me on. It's a pleasure to be on the show, and I appreciate you featuring this story, which is an important one.
Absolutely. And that's it for now. We'll see you next time.